Welcome, I'm Glen Anderson, producer and host of this TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives. This series explores a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. Mainstream media, politicians, and culture see the world in conventional ways. The establishment is stuck in how they see the world. In order to solve problems, we need to see things differently. This TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives, can help us see things differently so we can solve problems at all levels, from the local to the global. This series is called Glen's Parallax Perspectives. Here's what the word parallax means. Put one finger in front of your nose and another finger farther away. Close one eye, then open that eye and close the other. Your fingers will seem to move. This is called a parallax view. This TV series invites you to look at issues from fresh perspectives. Also, see much information about the issues that we cover in this TV series and previous episodes of this series at my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org. And now I invite you to watch this month's program. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can see the button is on for recording, so this is good. So I'll be silent for a moment and then we'll start us off. This month's interview on Glen's Parallax Perspectives will help us understand some of the realities of people who experience poverty. We'll explore both problems and solutions. First-hand experience being poor and raising children while poor is very different from the myths and misunderstandings that we hear from mainstream politicians and news media. I'm happy to be interviewing three persons with first-hand experience dealing with the problems and working for solutions. I'm happy to welcome Monica Peabody, Mary Vint, and Mischa Gilraen. I'm happy to have you all here. Thank you. We'll have a good time. Talk about some important things, but we'll enjoy the conversation, even though the issues are difficult. Americans learned about poverty during the Great Depression, and some of us also remember the federal government's efforts starting in the early 1960s. And we'll highlight a bit of that history in just a few minutes. But let's start first with an overview of what poverty is like nowadays. Mischa, I wonder, could you offer some information or insights about poverty nowadays?
Sure, thanks, Glenn. Well, many people assume that we have a very strong social safety net, but in reality, our social safety net has been slowly eroding over the last 50, 60 years. And I know Monica's going to talk a little bit more about that later, but the situation right now is that if you're a low-income parent and need to support your children, the amount that you're going to get from DSHS, if you're able to get benefits from DSHS, which is the Department of Social and Health Services, which administers welfare here in Washington State, is not even going to be enough for you to pay your rent, let alone all the other expenses that go along with raising children nowadays. So we really don't have a functional safety net at this point in our country.
Okay. Can anybody add to that as a starting point?
I remember back in the 70s, 80s, somebody on a TANF grant could pay rent on it. And so that's where the big difference is now too. Like Mischa was just saying, you can't afford housing. Not that they didn't have a lot, but they had a roof over their head. That was in this area anyway, for the Washington Olympia area. That was true, and it's not true anymore. And you can't even get housing, like low-income subsidized housing, very fast. You have to be on a waiting list for a long time. So people could be homeless for years and still not get housing with children.
Um, Poverty exists in all age ranges, among single persons, in families, older folks, younger folks, everybody. Mary, can you share some more insights into the current realities for families that are living in poverty, families with kids living in poverty?
Well, the housing is a thing. Unless you're blessed enough to get that Section 8 voucher, which takes about at least 5 years to get it, and that's if you can get on the list, and they don't even open up very often. And then there's the child care. If you can get the child care, then you have to afford the child care, and you can get a subsidy maybe, but. And then if you have special needs kids, it's even all the more difficult. And now with the pandemic, I mean, I don't see a lot of people that need childcare will be able to get it, and especially people with special needs kids. It was already like next to impossible to find childcare for.
Yeah, so you have kind of multiple things piling up.
Yeah, layers,
Yeah.
layers of obstacles.
Yeah. Can anybody else add to this? Any from anybody else?
Well, I'd love to add to it. One thing, I think there are many Americans who knew poverty long before 1930. I think that in this country we have some huge racial disparities around wealth and age disparities, and there's not equality, even though we kind of claim to be a country that values equality. People of color have always been poor and had to struggle harder to find jobs and keep jobs and have a sustainable living. And that's been true for a long time, since the birth of our country. And it's still true today. People of color are poorer and women are poor, and the largest group of people living in poverty in this country are children, and that is shameful. One time at Power, I interviewed a mother from Germany. She wanted to interview me for her class, and I said, okay, I want to interview you back. So we had a discussion about poverty in both Germany and the US, and she left that interview shocked and horrified at the lack of support that this country provides to families. And she's a young mother. She's married to an American, and she said, boy, if anything ever happens to him, I'm going to have to go home. And at Power, we've considered creating economic refugees to send to Sweden and Germany and places that actually have Cuba. I mean, places that actually have a safety net for families.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that safety net a bit later in the interview, but I think it's important for people to get this context, because it's not what most people know. If you have firsthand experience, then you have firsthand experience and but for a lot of folks, it's like maybe you'll read about it in the newspaper or see it on TV or hear a politician talk about it, but you're not going to get the straight scoop on what the realities are. And that's why I'm glad that we have you folks on for this interview here. Monica, I want to connect with you here. Can you help us understand some of the historical insights about poverty, such as the problems and solutions during the Great Depression era of the 1930s, and how welfare, quote unquote welfare, and other programs have evolved over time? Can you tell us about that?
I'd love to. In this country, we often start the story with the government created the WPA program to provide jobs to people in poverty after the Great Depression. Well, what happened before the government created the WPA program is that there were hunger marches, huge hunger marches all over the country. Every state had hundreds and thousands of people marching to their capital, starting in 1930. And in 1932, 100,000 people came to the U.S. Capitol from all over the country, and a giant hunger march. and created Hooverville. And these are parts of our history that a lot of people don't know.
Right, and the Hooverville was because President Hoover, who was president as a Republican before Franklin Roosevelt was elected, didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And people created these encampments of people who were so poor and homeless that they created little encampments, and there was a Hooverville down by Capitol Lake in Olympia.
Right.
And these were all over the country, and they named them Hoovervilles because they were trying to insult the president, who was negligent. If you can imagine having a president who refuses to solve problems.
Can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the interesting things about our history, is that at that time, if people were poor, they didn't blame themselves. They blamed the fact that they didn't have homes, that they didn't have access to jobs that paid a living wage, that were safe, that provided them dignity. For people that couldn't work, they were angry because they didn't have access to relief and unemployment and benefits. And they expected the government to provide a basic sustenance to them. And that dialogue has changed so much over the years, to the point where we now have a belief that if you're poor, it's because you haven't worked hard enough or done something. And the government gets away with having a minimum wage that is so substandard, and allowing mass amounts of people to be homeless, and people that need medical attention, mental health, addiction resources, like there are people. It's unbelievable, the negligence of our government at this point.
That shift in the narrative that you mentioned is really an important part of the problem nowadays, because, as you said, people used to recognize that these were systemic problems in how the economy was functioning, and the government being negligent in failing to fix the economy in ways that would serve people's needs. And then the conservatives have been making this your own personal fault, your failure as a person, you're negligent as an individual. And that narrative has really stuck. And we'll be addressing this a bit later on in the interview as well. Can you, Monica, I want to check with you about another thing here. From 1935 to 1996, one of the most important federal programs to help poor families was AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, is what those initials spell out. And this was done as a federal government program. They had some state funding in it, but it was an important federal program. And then in 1996, President Bill Clinton, a Democrat, took ideas that the Republican Party had been promoting, and he replaced AFDC with basically a Republican concept, a federal program called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, TANF. Can you tell us about that transition, the transition from AFDC to TANF, and what some of TANF's problems are?
Yes.
I'll bet you can.
Unhappily. So I received AFDC. My daughter's 30, and I found when she was a baby, we were left by her other parent, and I was a single parent, and I looked for work, but I had a baby. I, couldn't afford childcare, and so I turned to public assistance. And at that time, it was small. Like, Mary mentioned that in 1970, AFDC grant was at 100% of the poverty level. It met your basic needs, very basic, but your basic needs. By the time I was receiving it in 1990, it was probably about 60% of the federal poverty level. So it paid for a lot less, although things cost less then. Today, it's 40%. Of the federal poverty level. And like Mary said, it won't pay rent. It doesn't even come close. A TANF grant for a single parent and her child today is $447. When I received it, it was $440. So, and that's 30 years ago. So, we have not maintained or prioritized these benefits at all. In fact, we've worked so hard as a nation to demonize the people that need them. We haven't demonized the children because that's kind of hard to do, but we've demonized their parents.
Yeah.
And a lot goes into that. Racism goes into that because we've portrayed welfare recipients as Black women, which Black women are poor. They often need assistance, but they're not the majority of people on welfare. That's one of the myths we'll probably talk about later. Women have been characterized as having a lot of children to get more welfare. That's another myth we'll probably...
Yeah, this is with the grant level so low, that is not a money-making scheme. That's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
No.
You have, the poorer you get.
It isn't, and it's actually a false myth because the birth rate among welfare recipients is lower than the national average. So, we've demonized this program. And so what happened in 1996 with Bill Clinton, using that as a platform to get elected, that he was going to end welfare as we know it, because, we have to divert people's attention in this country to what's really happening, which is that we have a nation that is supporting people to get obscenely wealthy at the expense of the majority of us, the 99%, who are just, working hard to get by or not getting by. And one of the things that switch did was took a federal program that was a safety net, and it didn't matter what state you were in, they were the same rules, and turned it into state programs. So devolved it so that states could make up their own rules, and gave those states a lump sum of money to create their own rules. So in very conservative states that really buy into that myth of poverty being poor people's fault, people hardly get anything. I mean, there are welfare grants as low as like $200. And then they created a time limit so that you can only be poor for a certain amount of time, and then your children get nothing.
Yeah.
Except for maybe some food stamps, which is still a federal program. They created all kinds of penalties. So if you're not doing the things that you're supposed to be, that they say you're supposed to be doing, like looking for work, and I remember going into the welfare office because Power's been doing outreach to welfare recipients for a long time in this town.
Power is a nonprofit group that all three of you are active with, and we'll talk about that. But yeah,
Parents Organizing for Welfare and Economic Rights. And I remember, and also at that point, I had started a cleaning business, but I was still receiving some medical support for my daughter and I, and a little bit of food stamps. And going into the welfare office, and every time I went, there would be somebody in tears. And I would go over and talk to them, what's going on? And, I'm in my last quarter of my 4-year degree that I've worked so hard to get, and they're telling me I have to quit school and go find the first job I can find. And that's why I'm in school, so I can get a job that will support my kids. Or another time, I remember going into the welfare office, a woman in tears, and I was like, what's the matter? They say, my baby and my husband have AIDS, and they say that I have to go work and not take care of my baby and my husband because there's this new go to work program. And it's like, no, honey, you can get an exception. But they created these rules that just were inhuman and made no sense for real families and problems that people face.
Yeah, the intent seemed to be to oppress poor people, to blame poor people, and to micromanage your life because you're too damn stupid to make your own decisions as an adult, and you need conservative government to do it for you. So, I mean, we'll get into this a bit later, too. I want to connect back with Mary. A few minutes ago, you shared some insights about the current realities for families living in poverty. Could either you or anybody else tell us more about current realities of raising children specifically? And you did mention this because you mentioned childcare few minutes ago, and we're a bit tight on time for the question. Is there anything else that needs to be said about raising kids in poverty?
Well,
that could be brief.
I would say that a lot of the rules that they have for TANF recipients they're detrimental to children and families. They cause undue stress. They pressure you to find just anybody to watch your kids. Like when I was in the Work First program, you're supposed to find a backup if your child care provider can't take your kid because your kid's sick. You're not even really supposed to be with your child if your child is sick. And that's conflicting. And when you go to the welfare office and CPS is upstairs and you wonder, like, you feel pressured almost to neglect your kid to pass the TANF rules so you can have a roof over your head so that you can support your kid, but at the same time, you know that a lot of the things that they're pressuring you to do are not in the best interest of your child.
Yeah, and you mentioned CPS upstairs from the office, Child Protective Service. They're the part of DSHS that goes after people who are negligent in taking care of the kids. And the system is designed to hurt the kids. So it's like a catch-22 there. I want to check back with Monica about another related matter here. Ending poverty and providing a decent standard of living for all people is difficult for a whole bunch of reasons. And among the obstacles that interfere with ending poverty are some common myths or misunderstandings about poverty. You mentioned these just a moment ago. And these are really decades old and they persist now. You've talked about some of that. Is there anything else that you could say about myths or misunderstandings that we need to correct?
Yes. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Wait, were you talking to me or Monica? I'm sorry.
Yeah, either one of you, actually.
Okay, well, the myth that people that care for children all the time are just basically hanging out and doing nothing. That's a big myth that I see. And so there's this idea that you need to get to work and be productive and don't use your kids as an excuse. Well, kids aren't an excuse. They're full-time job. I mean, full-time, like, even when you're sleeping. That's a big misconception, I think, about people, caregivers and people living in poverty that are caregiving. Yeah.
That's so true. One of the things that I always hear from in places where low-income people are, as well as places where high-income people are, is that the immigrants are taking our jobs, that I can't get a job because I'm white. Well, that's, all I can do is just say, why do you think that? And there's so many misconceptions around that. And then we'll ask questions like, did you know that you can't get welfare assistance until you've been documented in this state for 5 years? And they say, no, I didn't know that. Did you know that if you're undocumented, you can't get assistance at all? No, I didn't know that. So there's a lot of misconceptions about who's benefiting that are just wrong. And, I think that if people did really understand that food stamps provide a few dollars a day per meal to someone trying to raise a family, and how low the welfare grants are, I think that people might be really surprised. And Mary alluded to our housing assistance, our Section 8 program, that the waiting list is closed. You can't even get on the waiting list. Every 3 years or so it opens and thousands of people apply, and a very small portion of those people are going to be put on a waiting list for 7 years.
Yeah.
There really isn't.
The general public does not know these things, and it seems like our popular culture and government want people to stay ignorant, because that way people will not understand the realities, and that way people will be complicit in allowing conservatives and the government and our dominant culture and the mainstream media, which is largely clueless, to continue abusing poor folks.
Mm-hmm. And if poor white people feel like poor brown people are to blame, or poor black people, you know, if they can keep us racially divided, if they can make, you know, keep us from getting together and fighting as a group, you know, then they win.
Right. I want to spend a couple of minutes here exploring some more insights and analysis about the realities from mainstream culture, politics, media, and we've gotten into this a bit, and we're a bit behind on the time, so we have a few minutes to do some more of this. Is there anything else along this line that somebody needs to add to in the way of myths or misunderstandings that are widespread? I can add something. Oh, Mischa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was. Well, I think one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is just that it's not just you walk into the welfare office and are given a check. There's, like Monica said earlier, there's so many rules, and the caseworkers at DSHS are not always going to tell you about all the rules, and oftentimes will look for excuses to kick you off of welfare. And so really, I think, you know, a large part of what we do at Power, Parents Organizing for Welfare and Economic Rights, is that we try to educate each other about what the rules are, how to know what you're entitled to, so that you can walk into the welfare office and be prepared.
Yeah. From 1972 to 74, I worked for 2 full years at a local welfare office, a public assistance office for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. And that experience gave me additional insights besides what I already suspected might be the case. And I've shared these insights. In fact, the reason I moved to Olympia was to share these insights with folks at DSHS and state legislature and so forth. And what I figured out very promptly was that the system was designed to punish poor people for being poor, and it was designed to do that in order to distract the general public from recognizing the inherent injustices of our economic and political systems that make people poor. And if we had real economic justice, we would not have any poverty. But instead we have an economic system that causes poverty, that underpays people, that does not have a social safety net to meet people's needs if they're having difficulties. And so rather than solve the problems, the system is designed in various ways to harass and humiliate poor people. And I figured out very promptly when I started working there in October of 72 that these folks are actually earning their meager income by enduring those humiliations and those oppressions. So they were actually earning that money in a way that the government and our larger society was willing to pay this pittance for. And so I took notes without mentioning anybody's name, but I took notes about some of the insights and experiences I was finding. I talked to my state legislator about this. I lived elsewhere, not here yet. And I moved to Olympia. I wrote up a report. It was dozens of pages, and gave that report to my legislator and to some other legislators. And my legislator arranged an appointment with me to meet with the head guy, I mean, the very, very top person at DSHS. And he read my report, and we had a chance to discuss. Well, on page 17, I said this, and on page 24, I said that, and so forth. And I also, at the urging of the lobbyists from a civil rights organization, a racial justice group based in Seattle, I testified to some state legislative committees about some of the realities. And one of the things I told them, I mean, I told them this basic analysis I'm sharing with you folks now, but I also told them that there's a poor man that I would see from time to time, and he kept saying he had a really, really painful tooth here right up front. And one time I came there, that tooth was missing. I said, "What happened to your tooth?" He said the pain got so bad that he grabbed a pair of pliers and he just yanked it out. and he told me, what the hell kind of a country is this where a person with a severe long-standing toothache has to pull his own tooth? So I went at the legislature one time when I was talking to a legislative committee. I told them that story about this guy and his tooth. But most people in the legislature do not understand the things that you folks are saying, and they don't have enough contact with poor people to understand the realities, and they're instead kind of perpetuating these myths. So I just wanted to share that firsthand experience.
And I think you can really track, you know, over the last 50, 60 years as TANF and AFDC benefits have been going down and down and down, our corporate welfare has been going up and up and up. And the fact that there's always money to give tax cuts to businesses, but there's never money for people.
Right. So I just lost your audio.
I think you muted yourself, Mischa, or something.
It's back again now.
Okay, sorry.
This is what modern technology will do, is cut us out sometimes. But yeah, that's exactly right. And the big tax cut at the end of 2017 that Trump and the Republicans pushed through is overwhelmingly for big corporations and extremely rich people. And even the bills that Congress has passed now during this pandemic, huge amounts of benefits go to giant corporations, including extremely wealthy corporations, and ordinary people get really very, very little. And so this is continuing even now. It just persists. There's a huge imbalance in power between governments and poor people. Anytime you have a social system where people are out of balance, and some people have way too much political and economic power and other people have way too little, you've got injustices there. And I noticed those power imbalances when I worked in the welfare offices, and you folks, of course, have had your own experiences with that. And it's natural that people who have suffered injustices should organize to protect their rights. And this includes people who receive public assistance and need to organize for welfare rights to protect their own selves and their families. Monica, can you tell us about the origins of the welfare rights movement and how it has evolved over the decades? And we're a bit tight on time.
Yeah, so the welfare rights movement, so welfare benefits started as, after World War II, as kind of a widow's benefit, because there were a lot of widows, and most of the people that received welfare benefits were white women with children who were widowed. And it wasn't equally distributed to all single parents. It was definitely hard for Black women, for women of color, to get public assistance. And so the welfare rights movement was created around that imbalance, and mostly by Black women who spoke up and said, no more, you know, we deserve equal access to these benefits. And the welfare rights group was effective. Around that same time, Martin Luther King was running the Poor People's Campaign. Again, people marched to Washington and set up camp on the White House lawn. And it was effective. People listened. Some anti-poverty programs were created. And there was also a racial backlash that I think, are still feeling today. It was about that time that the media really switched the focus of who's poor and why. So prior to 1960, most news stories about poverty featured white people. And post 1960, most stories that featured poverty featured people of color. And that's about the time that we started blaming people for their own poverty. And I think there's a big racial component in that. And, I think that's a big part of why we devalued and have let public benefits, welfare benefits slide to the present dismal state that they're in, because we see this as, we've turned this into a issue that, it's a program for people of color. They don't deserve these benefits. And, we've really racialized poverty in a way that isn't accurate or fair.
Yeah, it's the us versus them thing that we keep seeing. And we're seeing a lot more of this us versus them stuff now these last number of years. I want to revisit something that we had talked about a bit earlier here, and kind of flesh this out just a bit. A lot of the nations that are rich, and even many nations that are not rich, generously fund housing, education, healthcare, social services, and other programs to help people who are in need, people who are having difficulties. And I keep seeing lists and comparisons about how the United States ranks compared to other nations on these things. And the United States is very often either at the bottom or very near the bottom compared to a whole lot of other nations that do take care of poor people, do take care of sick people, and so forth. And compared to other rich nations, the United States really does a terrible job of meeting people's basic needs for income, health, housing, and so forth. Americans really do want a strong social safety net to meet people's basic needs. Mary, I want to check back with you here to see, can you start our conversation about the need for a social safety net, and then maybe others can add to that if time permits.
Well, I think with a strong social safety net, poverty doesn't have to be as devastating as it is. Like when you worry about, when your tooth, when you have to live with chronic illness and you don't have a place to live and you're not sure if you're going to be able to feed your children, and you're worried that your welfare worker is going to be mad and kick you off and maybe tell CPS upstairs. I don't know, just like it leads to a lot of health problems and despair and hopelessness. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like we can have a minimum standard of what we.
Okay, I'm missing some audio right now. Are other people missing the audio?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Mary.
I hear you, Mary.
Could somebody pick it up from there while?
Okay. Well.
Oh, there you are.
Other places do have a good social safety net, and a lot of the ideas that we are calling progressive or now, they're not that progressive in a lot of other countries. Yeah. It's not that radical of an idea to have a roof over everybody's head, or to make sure that everybody gets to go to the dentist. Yeah. It's not that crazy of an idea, but it seems to be here in the U.S.
Yeah, the United States really has become a rogue nation in allowing so many millions of people to suffer so badly, and other civilized countries just don't understand why the United States is so cruel and so negligent when we're richer than all these other places, and these other places provide health care and food and education and income and housing and stuff. The United States somehow can't figure this out, or doesn't want to figure it out.
Well,
go ahead.
And the reverse of that, I mean, not the reverse, but the direct consequence of that is that we have some of the worst numbers. Like we have a higher infant mortality rate than most nations. We have all kinds of indicators that poverty harms babies, children, mothers, everybody. And yet we allow this to continue. We have worse numbers than many much poorer countries, like you say. And there was an experiment done in a city in I think it was in Texas, where they gave everybody a guaranteed income in the city, and lo and behold, kids got better grades. You know, all of the indicators of health and happiness increased because people didn't have those, you know, stresses that Mary was talking about.
Right. Yeah. 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 A lot of the suffering that occurs in the United States occurs because federal and state governments have not created the necessary programs to help meet people's needs, or have not adequately funded those programs. And I wonder if Monica, I know, has particular knowledge about what's happening in the state of Washington at the legislative level and at the DSHS agency level. Are there things that you'd like to see passed? What's on the cutting edge that needs to be done now?
Well, you know, right now we're dealing with some pretty severe economic troubles because of the COVID shutdown. So, of course, the poorer you are, the more you're going to feel that effect. So, you know, we definitely need a countrywide WPA. We need a program that's going to provide people with jobs and income and support. The state of Washington, the people that run the welfare program, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Social and Health Services, and the unemployment agency, have created a 10-year plan to end poverty, which looks great on paper. It addresses the racial disparities that are present in poverty first and foremost, and talks about institutionalized racism and its connection to poverty, and has some great programs like getting people in education. I mean, education is a clear, undeniable indicator of that you can increase your income. Getting people access to money. There are programs that put money in people's pockets, like what's it called when you have a low income, and earned income tax credit.
Yeah.
You know, just giving, you know, access to money to people, to loans, to credit, to housing options, you know, just making those programs accessible are so important in increasing those positive outcomes that we want for all people.
Yeah, I want to thank Monica for sending me the link to that report. It's a 65-page report. I haven't read all of it, but I've read a good chunk of it. It's really, really smart. It's wise. It's insightful. It's compassionate. And I went ahead and posted a link to that on my blog, and I'll provide information on that at the end of the program here. So that's a step in the right direction. There are some people who have the good ideas here, and if we can get these things to prevail and to be implemented, that'd be good. I'm going to check with Mischa next here.
Sure.
All of you folks are working with an excellent nonprofit organization based here in Olympia, Washington, that for many years, including under a previous name of the organization, has been doing really excellent work to solve problems that we've been discussing and to help people on a case-by-case basis, the individuals deal with the system. The organization, of course, is Parents Organizing for Welfare and Economic Rights, and the initials spell out POWER, which is fun to have that name. And Mischa, can you tell us a bit about POWER as an organization and what it does?
Yeah, we're an organization of low-income parents, as it says in the title, and we do all sorts of things. One of the main things that we do, as I alluded to earlier, is help educate each other about what their rights are at the welfare office, what the rules are, and then take that information into the welfare office so that they can have the best possible outcomes. We help people do the research, and we give people the resources to do research and help them with that process. We also have a welfare witness program where we offer volunteers to go with people into the welfare office so that they're not alone. Because really, when you go into the welfare office, it can feel very daunting. And there's this person here who is your caseworker at DSHS, which is the Department of Social and Health Services, and they have all the power. And when we go in as somebody seeking welfare benefits, you really feel very overwhelmed, and it's really hard to speak up. So just having somebody else there as a support, to help you advocate for yourself, is a lot of what we do, and we find it to be very helpful. We also do Power Outage, which is a periodic gathering of people who are members of Power, and we do various types of events as part of that. And we also do some legislative work where we encourage our members to write to their legislators to create a stronger social safety net, because really that's one thing that really will help us lift people out of poverty, is for people to have the basic resources so that they can have housing, so that they can have food, so they can have medical care, so that they can have childcare, to really be raising kids that turn into well-educated adults, that then we can break that cycle of poverty.
Yeah. I want to give the phone number and the website and the email address so people can connect. And I'll mention these again at the end, and I also will post these to my blog. But you've had the same phone number in Olympia for years and years and years and years. It's 360-352-9716. And you also offer help to people outside of the Olympia area. You have a toll-free number, and that's 866-343-9716. So that's good. And you have a website, www.mamapower.org, MAMApower.org. That's good. And then people can get onto your email list and keep up in touch with you that way. You can email info@mamapower.org. That's info@mamapower.org. So I hope people will do that and stay connected, get connected, because it's a great way to really empower people. I mean, it really is what we need to be doing. I want to check with Mary next here. When we were preparing for this interview, and you and I were talking on the phone, Mary, you said that one of Power's current activities is a program that it calls the Alchemia Feminist Economic Collaborative.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can tell us about the Alchemia Feminist Economic Collaborative. What is that?
It's a group of us, and for a long time we had weekly meetings, and we would just like collaborate, catch up, and support each other as entrepreneurs in our businesses. And then we kind of quit having meetings, but then we did a market for a long time, and the markets were every Wednesday and every Thursday, and we have farmers, musicians. I'm a honey vendor, and I was growing herbs and selling them. We have artists, a bookkeeper that has mentored a couple of us here at Power, and we support each other to earn money, and while we take care of our kids. Our newest project, because we're not really going to be able to do the market because of COVID, and we wanted to do this anyways, but it's really good for right now during COVID, is to take our market to the web and have our own little web store for Alchemia. Yeah.
Yeah, I keep seeing creativity in your organization. People like to do things that are creative and fun and community building. So instead of just being a poor person who is victimized by our economy or victimized by our nation's politics, you folks are actually empowering yourselves and having a good time and doing positive things. For anybody who wants to get into that entrepreneurial thing that Mary mentioned, we have a great resource locally that Lisa Smith works with called Enterprise for Equity, and I'll mention that on my blog. I'll have the link to their website. It's enterpriseforequity.org, and they help ordinary folks start their own small businesses in smart ways, so you can create something that'll be generating some income for you. A moment ago, I provided Power's phone number, his website, and email address, and I'll repeat that at the end of the program so our viewers can get their paper and pencils or pen now and catch it at the end when I repeat it. But I also want to post to my blog those things and also a link so that people can watch this interview through my blog. And I will type up a thorough summary of what we said during the interview so they can read that if they don't want to spend an hour watching this. If somebody wants to help you folks with the issues you're working on and or to help Power as an organization, what would you like people to do? I know, Monica, you've been with it the longest, but Mary and Mischa have been with it for a good chunk of time too. What would any of you like to have people do?
Volunteers. We need a web designer.
Okay.
Yeah, people can email the same email address that Glen listed off earlier, the info@mamapower.org, or call us at our main number, the 360-352-9716. If you're interested in volunteering or getting involved, definitely let us know. We have plenty of ways for you to plug in.
Yeah, it really is a grassroots, people-powered thing that's bottom up, like the way real changes need to happen is bottom up and not top-down stuff. So
we have
We're
a lot.
also on Facebook too.
Yeah.
okay, what's their Facebook connection?
Oh, well, just look for Parents Organizing for Welfare and Economic Rights. If you look for Power, you won't find it. So fill out the whole thing. Parents
spell out the whole
Organizing,
name.
yeah, for
Okay.
Welfare and Economic Rights.
Great, thanks.
And I was just going to say something about how we've historically had a lot of creativity amongst our volunteer pool too. We've had people make movies for us, do photo essays. You know, there's a variety of ways to get involved. Some of them are super creative.
Yeah. And I want to just add one more plug for that 65-page report that Monica had provided for me that I've posted to my blog now. The thinking in there is so smart. This should be the kind of thing that now during this 2020 election season, we should be urging people who are running for the state legislature to read and support this kind of stuff. During the election campaign season is the time when these candidates and politicians are most open to hearing from people. So we need to send them the link to read that report and get on board with some better thinking than what we commonly see come out of the legislature. We generally have decent elected officials in the legislature from this area, but many places are negligent.
And also, it's important that you hold your legislators responsible for not just creating programs, but funding programs.
Yes.
Because a lot of times they will pass something in the legislature, but they won't attach any funding to it, so it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. And they figured out that that's a clever gimmick to pretend like they're doing something without having to do it.
Part of what's going on there is that Washington actually has one of the most regressive tax structures in the country.
Yeah.
And for such a progressive state to have such a regressive tax structure that there's never enough money for social services.
Right. And what that means is it is regressive in that poor people and working class people pay way more than their share because we rely so much on the sales tax, whereas rich people skate by because there's no income tax. There only are a few states in this country with no income tax. Washington is one of them, but we have a lot of people who make a lot of money and they skate by pretty much free. And so it's an upside down thing, and there's a long history and long nasty politics about how that came about, but we need to change our tax system and have a strong income tax both for individuals and for corporations. And I had worked on that in the 1970s, and we did not get as far as we needed to go. I again want to invite people to connect with Parents Organizing for Welfare and Economic Rights, Power, in several ways. The hotline again is 360. Excuse me. The hotline is the office is 360-352-9716. That's in Olympia. Toll free. If you're elsewhere, it's 343-9716. Website is www.mamapower.org. That's M-A-M-A power.org. And you can get onto their email list by emailing them at info@mamapower.org. I will have more resources posted to my blog, including the link to that really good report that Monica had provided for me about how to fix our state in a number of good ways. There's a good nonprofit organization that sends out email and action alerts. It's the Coalition for Human Needs. They deal a lot with poverty issues in very good ways. www.chn.org. At the national level and here in the state level, people might have heard about the Poor People's Campaign, and they have a website, www.poorpeoplescampaign.org, and they do really, really good stuff. In Seattle, there's an organization, Solid Ground, that is the contact point for this statewide Poverty Action Network, SPAN. You can visit solid-ground.org and see information, including how to connect with statewide Poverty Action Network. And there are some other resources too that are really, really good. We're just about out of time. I invite people to watch this interview on cable channel 22 if you are in Thurston County, Washington with cable. It'll air 3 times a week during August, Mondays at 1:30 p.m., Wednesdays at 5 o'clock p.m., Thursdays at 9 o'clock p.m. And I'll post the video and other stuff that we've been providing to my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org. And it'll be posted at the TV programs part and at the economics part. So please do share this information with your friends. I want to thank our guests, Mischa Gilraen and Mary Vint and Monica Peabody. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. A healthy and sustainable society would eliminate poverty. A healthy and sustainable society would make sure that every person has enough economic resources, including food, shelter, healthcare, education, transportation, and the various amenities that make life possible and enjoyable. Our society falls far short of these requirements. Nonprofit organizations such as Power and other good groups do a lot of good work, especially by organizing from the grassroots up to fix these problems. Each one of us can help in a variety of ways, and the solutions include empowering ourselves, learning how to organize grassroots movements, and other decent practical steps. You can get information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence through my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org, or you can phone me at 360-491-9093. We are all one human family. We all share one planet, and we can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs just exactly what you have to offer. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Glenn.
Thank you.